If you grew up without constant protection, your brain was wired differently. This video explains why. There's a reason Generation X looks at the world the way it does, and it has nothing to do with nostalgia, nothing to do with polishing the past. It has everything to do with how trust was handed to us early, quietly, without a manual. We've talked before about those born between 1965 and 1980, but this goes deeper. This starts with something that would never be allowed today. Picture yourself at 6 years old, in your dad's car. Front bench seat, no seatbelt, no booster, just bare legs sticking to hot vinyl, and a long road stretching forward. The radio belongs to you. You twist the knob slowly, sliding through static, searching, waiting, until one song finally breaks through, and it feels like a small victory. Then your dad looks over. He taps his leg. That's the signal. You scoot across the seat, climb up, wrap both hands around the steering wheel. It feels enormous, almost too big for you. He controls the pedals. You control the direction. White lines disappear under the hood, one after another, and every single one feels like it's on you. Today, people would call that reckless. Back then, it didn't feel reckless at all, because you weren't being careless. You were being trusted. Safety rules existed, but they were loose. Seatbelts were optional. Most people didn't even know why they were there. And that was just the beginning. Your mom pulls up outside the shops, tells you to stay in the car. She says 5 minutes. You watch her walk inside. 5 becomes 10. 10 stretches into 20. You sit there quietly, watching strangers pass, breathing on the glass, tracing shapes in the fog. Today, safety means a buzzing phone, a tracking app, a message that says you arrived. But you learned something else. You built an inner compass, right there in a supermarket car park. You learned that safety wasn't a notification. It was a feeling, something you carried inside. Once that compass was set, the neighborhood opened up. It wasn't just streets and houses anymore. It was yours. Think about the woods at the end of the block, the empty lot behind the shops. Today they'd be called dangerous, neglected, off limits. Back then, that's where independence was born. Whole afternoons disappeared there, building forts out of whatever you could find. Old plywood, carpet scraps left on the curb, milk crates borrowed from behind the grocery store. No instructions, no supervision. You learned fast. If boards didn't overlap, rain came straight through. You learned what splinters felt like. You learned how to pry a rusty nail loose with the back of a hammer. You came home filthy, dirt under your nails, cuts on your shins. But you also came home proud. You'd built something real, something that belonged to you. A place where no trespassing signs didn't matter. That's also where you learned people. No adults stepped in to fix things. No referee, no intervention. Who got the best spot in the fort? Who stood watch? You had to work it out. Because if you didn't, the game ended and you went home alone. So you learned how to talk, how to compromise, how to stand firm when it mattered. You were shaping your character in the woods, while your parents thought you were just killing time. And then there was your bike. That wasn't a toy. It was freedom. On 2 wheels, it was power. You spent hours making it yours, playing cards clipped to the spokes, so it sounded like a motorbike. Handlebars wrapped in bright electrical tape. Maybe a banana seat with a tall sissy bar, if you were lucky. You knew every alley, every shortcut, every plywood ramp balanced on a brick. You didn't need directions to find your friends. You looked for the pile of bikes dumped on a lawn. That pile meant something was happening. You weren't chasing a dot on a screen. You followed noise. You followed laughter. You followed the smell of cut grass and the stretch of long afternoon shadows. You weren't just riding. You were learning the terrain. Then you hit the hill. You're flying. Feet off the pedals. Wind in your face. The front tire hits a rock. You flip. You slam into pavement. Gravel tears into your hands. Blood runs down your leg before you even stand up. You limp home, knee screaming. You walk inside. Your mom looks once, sighs, "You're fine, clean it up." Head back out, and you do. That scab stays with you for weeks, a quiet badge of honor. There were no pads and no helmets. Most stores didn't even sell them. And when kids came over, They didn't just bring themselves. They brought their germs. Living rooms filled with children you barely knew, all circling one miserable 7-year-old. Red spots, itchy skin, a chickenpox party. The goal wasn't to avoid it. The goal was to catch it, get it over with, build immunity, move on. Mothers drank coffee in the kitchen. Kids shared cups and toys with someone contagious on purpose. It built a toughness, a quiet resilience, one that's fading now. You learned early that being hurt wasn't the same as being broken. That line still separates generations. And your control of the neighborhood didn't stop at streets and forts. It extended to machines. You grew up when things weren't sealed shut. You could see parts move, smell oil, feel metal. You weren't just allowed to understand how things worked. You were expected to. Think back to the first time your bike chain slipped or a tire went flat. You didn't wait for help. You didn't look for an expert. You flipped the bike upside down. Seat and handlebars on the ground. Grease covered your fingers. Black streaks climbed your shirt. You guided the chain back onto the gear, slowly, carefully. You learned how a wrench felt in your hand. You learned how tight was tight enough before metal snapped. By the time you were 10, you weren't just riding bikes. You were fixing them. That attitude lived everywhere. It was part of daily life. Every Saturday, your dad leaned over an open hood, trouble light swinging, elbows resting on the fender. You stood beside him, holding the flashlight, hearing words like alternator, spark plug, carburetor, and when the TV started flickering, when the VCR lost its tracking, nobody called support. You gave it a firm tap on the side. You crawled behind the heavy cabinet, red, white, and yellow cables tangled in dust. You twisted them just right. The picture came back. Slowly, you built a belief. Broken things were your responsibility. That mindset created a rare confidence. When something didn't work, you didn't panic. You assumed a screwdriver, a little lubricant, and patience would get you there. Today, when a phone breaks, it gets replaced. But you were trained to look inside first. You carried a quiet certainty that you could handle whatever the physical world threw at you. Still, toughness outside didn't mean freedom inside. At home, rules mattered. If you crossed a line and it happened fast, you talked back at dinner. Before the sentence ended, you heard it. The scrape of a wooden spoon, sliding out of a drawer. No second warning. Some parents use spoons. Some use belts. This isn't about judging it. Psychologically, and it did something specific. You learned that actions had immediate consequences. Not talks, not timeouts, just cause and effect. That wiring stays with you. But if weekdays were about rules, weekends were about release. Sunday mornings were sacred. It's 7:30 a.m. You're awake before anyone else, pajamas on, TV glowing in a dark living room. The Flintstones, Scooby-Doo, He-Man, Transformers, Thundercats. For 4 hours, that screen was a doorway. And if you missed it, it was gone. No on demand, no second chance. Without realizing it, you learned something powerful. Some moments only happen once. Being there matters. The world doesn't wait. One of the quietest lessons came from school. Learning was slow, physical, final. Without the internet, your brain had to hold things. Information wasn't disposable. If you wanted a phone number, a date, a capital city, you had to already know it. You had to carry it. Remember the mimeograph machine, the steady thump, the swish, purple ink, warm worksheets, that sharp chemical smell. Today, kids get flooded with links. You got a number 2 pencil and one sheet of lined paper. If you messed up, there was no undo. You erased it, smudges and all, and kept going. You learned that choices had weight. You couldn't reset your way out of mistakes. That built focus. Most kids never develop now. When you wrote an essay, there weren't 20 tabs open. No notifications pulling you away, just notes, a textbook, and your thoughts. You learned how to stay with one idea for a long time. While the world learned to skim, you were trained to go deep. And then there was the library. Today, research takes seconds. Back then, it was a hunt. You stood at the card catalog, pulled open heavy wooden drawers, flipped through endless typed cards. You learned that knowledge costs something: time, effort, movement. Because you worked for it, you respected it, you earned it. And while school shaped your mind, the mall shaped your social life. Before profiles and feeds, the mall was your network. It's where you learn how to exist around people. Picture being dropped off with $10 in your pocket. You weren't there to buy much. You were there to be seen and to see others. You walked the loop, record store, arcade. Every lap taught you something: how to read faces, who felt safe, who felt dangerous, where you belonged. This was identity before screens. If you wanted to belong to a group, you wore it. Band shirts, flannel, beat-up Doc Martens, neon windbreakers. But there was a catch. You had to back it up. In real life, no screen to hide behind, no edited version of yourself. If you dressed like a skater, you'd better know how to hang with skaters. You couldn't just post it. You had to live it. As you got older, that independence shifted. It wasn't only about how far you could ride. It was about what you could earn. For Generation X, a first job wasn't a resume builder. It wasn't sanitized. It was a blunt introduction to adulthood. Think about the paper route. At 11 or 15, that route was your first real deal. People counted on you. You brought the world to their doorstep. You woke at 5:15 in the morning, the house still asleep, the air sharp enough to cut through you. You sat on the cold garage floor, folding thick Sunday papers, snapping heavy rubber bands around them. You stuffed them into a canvas bag, almost as big as you were, slung it over your shoulder, and pedaled into the dark. You didn't check the weather. You felt it. You memorized streets, hit the same porches. At the same time, every single day, once a month, you collected. You knocked. You waited. You asked adults for money they owed you. You learned how to hear no, how to keep numbers straight, how to be responsible. If the paper was wet, you heard about it. In those moments, you weren't a kid. You were running a business. And if you didn't have a route, you were behind a fast food counter or bagging groceries. This was before touchscreens, before self-checkout. If you worked a register, math lived in your head. When the machine jammed, you didn't freeze. You grabbed a pen, you grabbed paper, you figured it out. You worked with teams where the manager was barely older than you. You survived Friday night rushes without a screen telling you what was left. It was loud, greasy, stressful. You learned what money meant because you knew exactly how much effort it took to earn it. Pay didn't appear in an app. You held a paper check. You took it to the bank. You stood in line. You felt its weight. That built a grit that never left. You learned how to get things done when no one was watching. As you moved into your teen years, you stepped into something that barely exists now. You were a latchkey kid. You unlocked an empty house with a key on a string round your neck. A note waited on the counter. For hours, your time was yours. No one scheduled your afternoon. Today, kids live on color-coded calendars, tutoring, practice, everything planned. But you had boredom, and boredom breeds creativity. Even making a phone call took courage. You stretched that long, twisted phone cord across the kitchen, searching for privacy. You dialed a house phone, no smartphones. First, you had to get past the gatekeeper. You spoke politely, explained why you were calling. You handled an adult just to hear, "Hang on, I'll get them." You were learning how to deal with authority before you were even a teenager. And when you finally went out on a Friday night, you disappeared. No GPS, no stories, no permanent record. If you did something dumb in a parking lot at midnight, only the people there knew. You had room to mess up. You had space to try on different versions of yourself without an audience. You figured out who you were in private, no constant feedback, no noise. That patience showed up everywhere, even in love. Think about the mixtape. That was the Gen X love letter. You couldn't send a link. You sat there watching the tape turn, timing play and record, just right. You spent hours choosing songs, writing the track list by hand, maybe decorating the case. It took time. It took nerve. You were handing someone proof of effort, And because it was hard, it mattered. All of it did. The waiting, the work, the lack of a safety net. It trained you for a long life. So when the world today feels foreign, remember this. You're not behind. You're carrying skills that are disappearing. While everything now performs for attention, you were out there living. You built yourself without a digital trail. You learned to trust your gut because you had to. That quiet strength is still there. It's the same compass you felt the first time your hands wrapped around that steering wheel, and you've been steering your own way ever since.